Welcome to the Link Online. Hello and welcome once again to the program. I'm here with my teammates. Vincenzo Morello is back with us again this week. We're glad to have him. Hello, Vincenzo.
Again, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And our regular Levon Savants.
Hey.
Our political columnist, our man about the Arctic, the man who does all kinds
the Renaissance man of Radio Canada International.
I'm Mark Montgomery, and in the control room today we have Carl Boulanger, Pierre-Luc Blais, and the man of men, the top, the commander, Dutil. He's not even looking at us.
You know why I'm doing this?
No, I don't.
So in the Soviet military where I served, you weren't supposed to salute unless your head was covered.
Oh, I see. So I see, like this.
Yeah. So if you don't have a hat, so
Every week I find out something new about you, apparently.
I remember walking across the parade square once, and I was a drummer in the band, and I had drumsticks in my hand, and an officer walked by, and the sergeant said, "Salute!" The drumsticks. The officer sort of looked and let it go. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. Today we're going to bring you all kinds of stories about Canada, the news, the events, information, that kind of thing. And I'd just like to say hello to our listeners on World Radio Paris, the shortwave service in Germany, and our friends at Cowrie 97.5 FM in Nigeria. How are you guys doing? Glad to have you along with us today. And we're going to start out with a story. Levon, what is your story?
Yeah, well, Canada appears to be finally ready to support an international ban on heavy fuel oil, and I'll bring you the reaction from some of Canadian shipping companies that work in the Arctic.
This is because heavy fuel oil is...
The heavy fuel oil is potentially very difficult to clean up if it spills out in the Arctic environment, and it's also the cheapest marine fuel.
But it's also very polluting. Yes, right. All right. Vincenzo, what about you? A different kind of story from you.
Valentine's Day special. We're talking about Tinder, but not in the way you think about it.
Okay, and I'll be talking.
Teaser.
You'll have to teach us about Tinder.
Actually, you're talking about the Arctic. Today it was like Arctic here in Montreal. It was like outside my house. It was minus 25 this morning.
And the sweaters are the reason.
Yeah, it's protection. Vincenzo, you're a tough guy, I tell you.
I have a hoodie. It's at my desk, so.
Well, in spite of the fact that it was like the Arctic here in Montreal, I'm going to be talking a story about, we're hearing about this major deadly virus, COVID-19, that is spreading. But where do these new viruses and other diseases come from? Well, an expert says partly because of climate change and partly because of a couple of other reasons. And we'll hear about that coming up a little bit later today on The Link Online. Okay, we're going to be talking about heavy fuel oils, and the World Maritime Body is meeting in London, England on Monday. And one of the issues the International Maritime Organization is going to discuss is this proposed ban on heavy fuel oil in the Arctic. This stuff is it's like mud. You have to heat it up before the ship can even use it, right?
Yeah, so heavy fuel oil is also known as bunker oil, is literally the stuff that remains at the bottom of a barrel once the kind of the distillation, good stuff is gone. So it's the cheapest oil. It's used very, very widely by maritime shipping. It has to be preheated. It's so thick that it has to be actually preheated before it will flow into the engine. So we started hearing rumors or reports on Wednesday that the Canadian government is finally decided to back this international campaign to ban heavy fuel oil in Arctic shipping. It's already banned in the Antarctic. And since at least 2015, there has been an international campaign backed by environmental groups, backed by some northern indigenous groups such as the International the Inuit Circumpolar Council and other indigenous groups, to ban this stuff because of the worries, kind of twofold. One is a spill. So the sailing season in the Arctic is so short that, and the water is cold, so that this, in case of a spill, it would be enormously difficult to clean this up, especially if it gets on the ice, under the ice, and all the effects it could have on the marine fauna and flora. So it's one of the things that environmental groups and this indigenous group have been pushing for. The other one is black carbon. So soot. Basically, because heavy fuel oil, when it's burnt, one naval architect I talked to basically told me that some people describe these engines as floating incinerators. They produce so much of this soot when they're, running these engines, that in a lot of the areas closer to the cities, within 200 nautical miles, the shipping companies are not even allowed to burn heavy fuel oil. They have to transfer to diesel, which produces fewer emissions. So this ban has been discussed for over 5 years now. And we started hearing that on Wednesday, during a conference call, what's called the Stakeholder Engagement, Transport Canada officials announced that Canada will finally support the ban. And I started calling Transport Canada, reached out to Transport Canada to check this out. They would neither confirm nor deny, but they sent me this statement saying the Government of Canada will publicly announce its position on this issue early next week once Canada has declared its official position to the international membership of the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and the Subcommittee on the Pollution and Prevention Response, like a subcommittee. So I started digging further. So I reached out to other people who were on this call, and they confirmed that this is in fact what government officials who were on this teleconference call told them. And I have, through all these years that I've been reporting on this issue, I've been trying to get the reaction of the Canadian industry. And I have never, up until Thursday, I had never heard a reaction from them. They would either decline to comment or would say, we're still studying this issue and we're not ready to comment. But Thursday was an exception. One of this CEOs who runs a shipping company called NEAS Group. It's a Montreal-based shipping company that serves this northern communities. It specializes in the community resupply. So basically, all these Arctic communities in Nunavut, in parts of northern Quebec, they don't have port infrastructure. They are basically cut off from the rest of the world. And the only way to get things there is through what's called community resupply. So basically, the ships that takes goods to these communities once a year during the short summer sailing season, and the rest gets flown in as needed. But most of the goods, especially the big bulky stuff, gets delivered by this community resupply. And one of the companies that does this is NEAS, and the person I talked to, her name is Suzanne Paquin. She's the CEO and president of NEAS, and she sounded very, very unhappy. She told me she was very, very disappointed with the Canadian position.
I think that the federal government is completely out of touch on Arctic marine fuel. This issue is not a priority issue. They are wrong. Transport Canada's wrong, the government's wrong, and the Prime Minister's wrong.
And so, I told her, listen, there are all these studies that show that, HFO spills could be very dangerous and very difficult to clean up. Why do you say it's wrong? Could you please explain? And here's what she had to say again.
Well, we support good governance, of course, including listening to the local voices. And, of course, we support Canadian testing, research, and science before taking any kind of decision. This has not been the case. There is absolutely no Canadian data. The Canadian Arctic suffers from a huge data deficit in all domains, including information relating to the environment and even climate change. I have never, ever seen, for me, I've been in this business for a long time, and I've never seen an HFO spill in the Arctic, never heard of an HFO spill in the Arctic. Black carbon, never heard of that in the Arctic. The Arctic is absolutely pristine in Canada.
So that was Suzanne Paquin. She's the president and CEO of NEAS Group Inc. It's a Montreal-based shipping company that specializes in supplying the Arctic communities in Nunavut and in Nunavik in northern Quebec. And so it's kind of interesting because for all these years we've been hearing from the environmental groups and their concerns about the environment. And the maritime shipping industry recently started pushing back against this argument and saying, well, there's no, these spills are the risk of them is very, very rare. And, we don't carry heavy fuel oil as cargo. We just carry it as fuel for the ships. Our tanks are double hulled. So even if the ship runs aground, there is very little risk of, a big spill. And the other argument that they started making, and it's a one that is has a lot more traction and kind of makes a lot more sense, is the increased cost. So I already mentioned that heavy fuel oil is the cheapest oil. And if this ban is implemented, these organizations, shipping maritime companies, will have to switch to something else, usually marine diesel, which is a bit better and more expensive. And what they're saying is that this will drive up the cost of all the goods in Arctic Canada because they will pass on this cost to their customers. So in conjunction with another fuel requirement that the IMO has adopted and came into effect as of January 1st, limiting the amount of sulfur in the fuel. And these would mean about $1,400 per household in Nunavut in increased cost in this summer resupply. So environmental groups are saying, yes, there will be an increased cost, but they're calling on the federal government to make sure that northern communities are not impacted, that there are some schemes, financial schemes are developed to basically balance the difference.
Now, you also did a story recently about one of the alternative fuels that the shipping industry is talking about, and that turns out to be not very good either.
Yeah, so I mentioned about the fact about this sulfur cap. So the IMO has adopted this 0.5% sulfur cap on all marine fuels. Now, HFO, heavy fuel oil, has 3.5% of sulfur content. So this marine industry, the marine fuel industry, came up with new blends and to meet the sulfur cap. Except what turns out that, yes, while they meet the sulfur cap, the flip side is that these fuels, these new blends, emit a lot more black carbon. So yes, you reduce pollution from sulfur, which causes acid rains and stuff like that, but you're pumping a lot more black carbon into the air when you use these new alternative blends. So, and the argument the environmental groups are making is that this is another argument in favor of switching to marine diesel, which is less polluting when it's burned.
Yeah.
So,
but she's probably right when she says there's a lack of information about what's going on in the Arctic. But by the same token, when she says there's no studies on carbon, for example, Well, there is, because I've done stories on that, where they have scientists in the Arctic on the ice and they see all the black soot on the ice. And this is affecting the reflectivity, or what is known in scientific terms as albedo. And that is because there's this black soot on the ice, it's helping the ice to melt even faster, which is, of course, all kinds of other problems.
And that's the concern that the environmentalists have with this black carbon, is that it's actually accelerating climate change. It's called a climate change forcer. They're claiming that in the Canadian Arctic there isn't enough data to make any kind of scientific conclusions. And they're also saying that, but there is data showing that air quality in northern Canada is really good. So all these claims about bad air quality because of shipping don't really make sense. So it's a very interesting balancing act, and it looks like Transport Canada decided to err on the side of caution and go towards a ban of HFO and see what happens.
I expect you'll have a story on that next week.
Yes, I will.
Okay, let's move on. And speaking of climate change, that's one of the things we're going to be talking about in just a moment. Oh, I thought he was going to give a little strike there. I missed. Oh, well, what are you going to do? All right, we've been hearing about this new disease, COVID-19, the coronavirus, or a coronavirus. For a long time, they were saying the coronavirus. And in fact, it is a coronavirus because there's a whole family of it. Anyway, it has already proven itself quite deadly. There's hundreds of people who have died from it. But where the heck did it come from? And where do any of these new diseases or more infectious diseases come from? Well, Dr. Courtney Howard is president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. She's also an emergency room physician in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. And she notes that there are actually, there's several reasons why this is happening. Partly because of climate change, partly because of eating non-traditional animals, i.e. bushmeat, and partly because of habitat destruction.
Well, when you think about it, infectious diseases involve often insects and host animals like birds or small mammals. And so as climate change changes precipitation levels, temperatures, humidity, essentially habitat changes in different parts of the world. So what was once a good place for one living being to live may become slightly less so. They may move to another place. And that's one of the reasons that it's making it, it's changing the patterns of infectious disease that we're seeing in clinics.
What kind of diseases are we seeing nowadays that we might not have seen in the past?
So here in Canada, Lyme disease is the infectious disease that's changing the most with climate change. The distribution of the tick that carries Lyme disease is changing. It's sort of making several kilometers progress every year because there's more days above zero, and that just allows it more time to move to a new place. In other parts of the world, we're seeing a increase in the transmissibility or the vectorial capacity of dengue fever. We're seeing malaria become more transmissible at increased elevations in Africa. And different Vibrio species, because surface temperatures in various water bodies are warming, are also, we're seeing an increase in their transmissibility as well.
Well, Dr. Howard, how do diseases jump from animals to humans?
Well, not every virus or bacteria is well suited to live in humans. They don't all think that we're a great place to set up shop. So it depends on the actual virus or bacteria itself. And in terms of how does it jump, it requires close contact. If you think about flu season and how we get the flu from one another, it's if we're close to one another, we have saliva that, reaches a surface, we touch that surface, we put it in our mouth, or somebody sneezes on us and we breathe it in. Those kinds of ways are, good ways for virus and bacteria to kind of hitch a ride and get into a new being. And the way that we get new viruses or bacteria from animals is not that different. Some of the ones that have been recently documented are to do with eating bushmeat that brings an animal that was traditionally not close to humans closer to humans, and then we eat it. It can have to do with a different host that may be infected becoming close, and then maybe a bat may be involved or a different kind of insect. Sometimes when humans encroach upon animal habitat, that's a different way that we can come closer to animals that can then infect us. And so really, it's any time where there's novel opportunity for humans, insects, and or other vectors and potential hosts to interact in a new way.
So what can we do to protect people from diseases that may become more prevalent because of climate change?
In terms of preventing things, there's a good article in the Lancet Planetary Health where some One Health experts, so people who really are experts at the intersection of human disease, the environment, and animals, really asked for more stringent guidelines around bushmeat and culturally appropriate new approaches that can hopefully reduce some of the potential for transmission of bushmeat to humans. We also need to look at habitat encroachment. Everybody needs a place to live, and so if humans destroy forests or other areas where other living beings have been, we don't give them a place to go, and so we're much more likely to catch a new disease from them. And of course, climate change, the more we warm, the more changes we'll see. So we do need to decrease greenhouse gas emissions so that we can try to keep these changes to a level that we can adapt to with these other measures.
And that was Dr. Courtney Howard. She is president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and she's also an emergency room doctor in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. And I have heard that this coronavirus came from bats, and there was a picture circulating on the net of somebody eating a bat, and I thought, do we eat bats? So maybe that's what happened, is somebody at this market in Wuhan, which is a big animal and fish market kind of thing in Wuhan, maybe somebody got it from there somehow if they were selling bats and one of them was infected with this and it jumped to a human and then...
Yeah, apparently bats are consumed in a lot of parts of Asia, not just in China, in Indonesia as well. It's something that people eat.
So this would be part of this thing where you're eating this so-called bushmeat, where it's not exactly what you would call a traditional type of food. It's not salmon or tuna or something like that, or
but don't forget that all the viruses or the majority of diseases we got as a humanity, from chickenpox to everything, came from the animals. It's just it took us thousands of years to develop immunity to it, but it all came from the proximity to animals,
or from insects which infect animals. So there could be like a pathway from 1 to 2 to us kind of thing. They might go through a couple of things before they get to us, or they might go directly from an insect bite or tick bite, which is one of the things she said is because of climate change, these ticks that had Lyme disease, which is apparently really unpleasant and hurtful, they've been moving north every year a couple of more kilometers because the winters are less cold and less long, so they're surviving and they're moving north. And I know throughout southern Ontario, southern Quebec, and right through the Maritimes, especially New Brunswick and so on, which are close to the American border. Now the ticks with Lyme disease are pretty much everywhere. So. And
you did a story the other day about the moose that had...
That's a different kind of tick. That's called a winter tick. It's the same species of animal, but again, these are basically blood-sucking. The ticks are blood-sucking. Blood-sucking. Are evil.
Well, they have to live too.
But when you get an animal like you think a big moose, but when you get literally thousands of these ticks on there sucking the blood, they literally bleed the animal to death. And the other thing that happens is, if you look at the story, it's a great story. The animals like the moose and so on, and deer, they get the ticks on, they itch, so they rub them against trees, they rub their fur off, which is their protection against the winter cold. Yeah. So without the fur, they suffer from cold and they get weak and they die either from loss of blood or exposure, or because they're weak, the predators get them and so on. And it's especially, of course, difficult for the young ones, the fawns and so on, because when they start losing a lot of blood, they're already more vulnerable. And I saw a statistic in, I think from New Hampshire or somewhere in the northern U.S., where 70% of the young did not survive. And wow. it was due to, so that's a big thing. All right, so we're going to move on in just a minute from nature to tech. All right, Vince, you're our tech guy this week, and apparently this is one of these things. I mean, social media is everywhere. People are using it like crazy, and one of them is a dating app, one of many, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely.
But what's happening to this dating app?
So yeah, a bit of a, I guess, palate cleanser story compared to like climate change and diseases. But a researcher out of Concordia University of Montreal did research on how some people are using dating apps for their own personal gain. And Stephanie Duguay, she's an assistant professor of communication studies at Concordia, and she found that apps like Tinder are used for personal marketing purposes.
All right, let's hear.
I'm interested in the way that dating apps have emerged as a newer form of technology to mediate dating and relationships. And it was just sort of, while I was researching Tinder and other dating apps, I started to realize that people were using this app for a range of different purposes. So as I saw sort of joke accounts and other things popping up on the app, I thought, this is something that I wanted to look further into.
So just like, I guess in a nutshell, what exactly did you find?
Well, I looked at Tinder specifically as sort of a case study. We know that people use technologies in the ways that work well for them in their lives, but apps and platforms are a bit different because they're always updating. They provide these features that are very social. So I found, of course, that people were using Tinder for a range of things, from political campaigning to business networking to selling things. Often they played on the expectation that Tinder is a dating app, kind of incorporating these themes into their campaigns. But sometimes they faced backlash because people viewed the app so much as a dating app, right? So even though Tinder has said that broadly it's to meet new people, which could mean a range of things, other users actually reinforce this interpretation of Tinder as a dating and hookup app. And so they might some of the people I spoke to said that other users would sometimes say, hey, you're doing this wrong. This is not what Tinder's for.
So yeah, some people actually, she was telling me that she spoke to somebody who was advertising a multi-level marketing campaign or products on Tinder. But now, so basically she wants to see how platforms react to off-label uses, what she calls off-label uses. And now Tinder has changed in the sense that it has an advertising policy. So previously brands would just launch campaigns on Tinder and hope to reach people. Now they partner up with Tinder and actually have like promoted advertising campaigns on the app.
How does Tinder work? I mean, for those of us who have no idea. I mean,
in a nutshell, it's a dating app where you set up your profile and it's pictures and text. Obviously, it's a little quick bio, and you swipe yes or no on people just solely on that. It's it's very simple and easy in that sense. Very easy to say yes or no on people. And but now, like as you're swiping, you'll see an ad pop up for like a beer or a movie or something on the app.
Marketing.
And so how would these companies get into? You create a profile?
Yeah, some companies or brands would just create a profile and hope people would swipe on them.
Do they do any digging into your past online history to find out what you're looking for and say, oh, he's been searching on beer, so we'll send him a beer ad kind of
In
thing?
terms of the new advertising policy or like in previous before?
Yeah, what they've been doing presently.
Oh, presently it's just based on location and age.
Okay.
I would assume, yeah.
So anyway, I mean, obviously people are going beyond off-label, as it were. Speaking of the internet, who's with us today watching us live?
Well, we have Gustavo, who is one of our most devoted viewers and listeners from Uruguay. We have Luis Caron, who says 30 minutes is not enough. Your program should be an hour long. There's so many good things to talk about. Continue your good work. Thank you, Luis. Merci beaucoup. And if you have any questions, we have somebody from Moscow watching us as well. So it's a bit of an international audience. If you have any questions, comments, tune in. Send us your questions on Facebook. I follow it live and I'll try to respond to them live.
Okay, I know Marie Claude is not watching us today. She's going to watch us later on on the replay on Facebook or our web
on
channel,
YouTube,
Radio.
or you can watch us on our website as well.
Radio Canada International. Well, that is all the time we have for today. So for Vincenzo Morello, Lavon Savant, I'm Mark Montgomery, and in the control room we have Carl Boulanger, Pierre-Luc Blais, and of course, the man of men, the one who knows 99% of the answers, Pierre Dutil. He doesn't know all of them because I asked him once, what's the meaning of life, and he couldn't answer me. But there you go. Okay, until next week, take care. Bye-bye.